The Kansas frontier of the 1870s was a land of restless movement. Thousands of wary travelers, dreamers, and settlers pushed westward, seeking farmland opportunity or simply a place to disappear from their past lives. The Santa Fe Trail cut across this wilderness like a scar, a lifeline of wagons, stagecoaches, and riders who carried with them not only hopes but also dangers. Bandits prowled the roads, sickness could claim a man in a day, and for those unlucky enough, even hospitality could become a death sentence. It was here in Osage Township, Kansas, where the Bender family planted themselves. They were immigrants. John Bender, his wife Elvira, their son John Jr., and daughter Kate. On the surface, they looked like ordinary settlers, hardworking, simple folk trying to scratch a living out of the harsh soil. They built a small one-room cabin and turned part of it into a modest inn and grocery stop for travelers moving west. The house was divided by a large canvas wagon sheet, one side for the family, the other for paying guests. But beneath the canvas curtain, a nightmare brewed. At first, the Bender Inn was nothing unusual. Tired travelers found a meal, a place to rest, and maybe even company. Kate Bender, the daughter, became the true lure. Unlike her mother, who was cold and stern, Kate was young, striking, and strangely charismatic. She posed as a spiritualist, offering seances, readings, and cures for illness. Many men, charmed by her looks and her promises, stopped longer than they should have, and then they vanished. For months, whispers spread among the wagon trains and homesteaders. Too many travelers seemed to disappear along this stretch of the Santa Fe Trail. Horses turned up wandering without riders. Wagons were abandoned on the roadside. Letters never reached home. Suspicion lingered like smoke, but in a lawless land where vanishing was as common as breathing, no one could put the pieces together. Yet, if you stood in front of the Bender Inn, you would see nothing but a humble home. You'd hear laughter, the clink of spoons against bowls of stew, the wind rustling through prairie grass. Nothing to betray the horrors within. But behind the curtain, directly beneath the very chairs where guests were asked to sit, lay a trapdoor. Beneath that trapdoor was a cellar, and in that cellar, blood soaked into the dirt, dark and heavy, telling a story the Benders tried to keep hidden. The inn that promised food and rest was becoming a slaughterhouse. The Kansas prairie had always been cruel, but nothing prepared its settlers for the family who would come to be known as the Bloody Benders. And soon, a single disappearance would unravel everything. Kate Bender was unlike the rest of her family. Where her father, John, spoke little English and kept to himself, and where her mother, Elvira, was cold and suspicious of outsiders, Kate leaned into attention. She introduced herself as a healer, a psychic, even a medium. She placed small advertisements in local papers, offering spiritual readings and cures. In an age when many still believed in spirits and the afterlife, Kate's allure was powerful. Travelers described her as a handsome, engaging woman who seemed far more educated than her surroundings. She was bold, something rare for women of the frontier. Kate openly discussed subjects like free love, spiritualism, and female independence, shocking the more traditional neighbors. To men, though, she was magnetic. She had a way of making strangers feel welcome, of convincing them to stay just a little longer, and staying longer at the Bender Inn was a dangerous mistake. Those who entered the small inn would often be seated at a place of honor, a chair near the canvas partition. Kate would charm them, pouring drinks, offering food, and drawing them into conversation. Her brother, John Jr., would laugh too loudly at her jokes, pretending to be harmless. Her father might stand behind the curtain, just out of sight, and then the hammer. A guest, distracted by Kate's eyes or her words, would never notice Johnster waiting behind the curtain with a heavy mallet. A sudden blow to the back of the head would drop them instantly. The trapdoor would open. The body, sometimes still alive, would be dragged down into the cellar. And there, throats were cut, possessions stolen, and the remains hidden until the earth itself seemed to turn against the Benders. It was Kate's face, her charm, her voice, that drew so many victims into that seat of death. Without her, the Bender family might have remained just another quiet immigrant household on the prairie. Instead, she became their most powerful weapon and the smiling mask of their crimes. But the Benders had made a mistake. They thought travelers would always be forgotten. They thought no one would ever come searching. They were wrong. By 1872, disappearances along the Santa Fe Trail were no longer just whispers. They were a pattern. Farmers and travelers alike began noticing wagons abandoned, horses found wandering, and letters never delivered. But life on the frontier was unforgiving. Many assumed these missing souls had fallen prey to sickness, Native American raids, or simply run out of luck. Still, the disappearances nagged at the settlers who lived nearby. Something wasn't right. That year, a man named Dr. William York set out to visit family in Independence, Kansas. York wasn't just any traveler. He came from a powerful family, respected and well-connected. His brothers included Colonel Ed York, a Civil War veteran, and Senator Alexander York, an influential lawmaker in Kansas. William was educated, well-liked, and not the sort of man to simply vanish without anyone asking questions. But vanish he did. Dr. York never made it home. His horse was found wandering alone. His family immediately sensed foul play. Unlike other missing men who were dismissed as drifters, William York's disappearance sent shockwaves. His brothers launched an investigation, scouring the trail, speaking to settlers, and pressing for answers. The search eventually led them to the modest little inn run by the Bender family. Kate Bender greeted them warmly, offering the same charm she gave to every guest. She listened sympathetically as the York brothers explained their missing sibling. She even offered to summon William's spirit, suggesting perhaps he had died along the trail. Colonel York, hardened by war, was suspicious but couldn't prove anything. The Benders smiled, served food, and acted the part of innocent innkeepers. But cracks began to show. Neighbors recalled that many who had stopped at the Benders never left. Others remembered seeing travelers enter the inn but not come out. The York brothers pressed harder, gathering testimony and refusing to let the matter drop. In a land where many could disappear without a trace, the Benders had finally chosen the wrong victim. Soon the township called a meeting. Citizens, outraged and fearful, demanded answers. Every family in the area was ordered to attend, including the Benders. But when the roll call was made, the Bender family was gone. They had vanished, leaving behind only silence, suspicion, and the faint smell of death. What the townspeople discovered when they entered the inn would haunt Kansas forever. The night the Benders were supposed to attend the township meeting, their cabin sat eerily quiet. No smoke from the chimney, no horses hitched outside, no laughter, no clatter of dishes. The prairie wind whistled through the grass, carrying only stillness. At first, neighbors thought little of it. Maybe the Benders had left for good. But when days passed with no sign of them, suspicion hardened into certainty they had fled. A search party was formed, and soon, men with torches and rifles descended upon the Bender cabin. The door creaked open. The room was neat, as if the family had tidied it before leaving. Shelves were stocked with canned goods, dishes stacked, beds made. But something about the air was wrong, heavy, fated, carrying the unmistakable stench of decay. Then someone pulled back the canvas curtain. There, behind the partition, sat the infamous wooden chairs, the very seats where guests had been entertained by Kate's charm. But the floorboards beneath were stained dark. Curious, a man lifted the rug. Beneath it, they discovered a trapdoor. When they pried it open, the smell that rose from the cellar was enough to make men gag. With lanterns raised, they descended into the earth. The dirt floor was soaked in blood. Thick, blackened patches stained the ground, splattered up the walls, and pooled in corners. It wasn't the blood of one man, but of many. The cellar wasn't for storage. It was a slaughterhouse. Further searching of the property revealed shallow graves in the orchard. Bodies were dragged out one by one, their skulls caved in, throats slashed, possessions stripped. Among them was the missing Dr. William York. In total, at least a dozen corpses were recovered, though many believed the Benders' true toll was far higher. Some whispered of 20 victims, others 30. How many had fallen for Kate's smile and John's hammer, no one could ever truly know. The discovery horrified the entire state. Newspapers christened them the Bloody Benders, and stories spread like wildfire across the country. An immigrant family, living quietly on the plains, had turned their home into a killing ground. But the greatest horror was not the blood, not even the bodies. It was the fact that the Benders were gone. They had slipped into the wilderness, vanishing like ghosts into the prairie. And despite manhunts, posses, and promises of bounty, they were never truly found. The inn had given up its secrets, but the Benders themselves remained shadows, hiding in plain sight, or perhaps starting anew elsewhere, ready to kill again. The discovery of the Benders' blood-soaked cellar and orchard graves sent shockwaves across Kansas. Word spread quickly, not just by newspaper but by word of mouth, carried along the trails by frightened settlers. The Bender cabin, once a quiet stop for travelers, was now a monument to horror. People came from miles to see it, to peer into the cellar where so many had died. Some fainted from the stench. Others left convinced the devil himself had walked the Kansas plains. But fascination quickly turned to fury. The Benders had slipped away like shadows, and the people of Kansas demanded justice. A massive manhunt was organized. Posses armed with rifles and pistols swept across the prairie. Farmers left their fields. Shopkeepers abandoned their stores, all determined to track down the murderous family. The last anyone had seen of the Benders was a wagon creaking away into the horizon. Some believed they fled north toward Nebraska. Others swore they crossed into Indian territory. There were even rumors they boarded a train east, disappearing into the anonymity of the cities. Wherever they had gone, they left behind only terror and unanswered questions. Rewards were posted. The York family, still grieving the death of Dr. William York, offered a large sum for the capture of the killers. Newspapers across the country printed lurid accounts of the Kansas fiends. Illustrations showed Kate Bender with wild, devilish eyes and Johnster swinging his bloody hammer. The family became infamous overnight, the stuff of both nightmares and campfire stories. The manhunt stretched on for weeks. Posses thought they had cornered the Benders in a wooded area, only to find a different family of settlers. At one point, vigilantes caught 2 women traveling with men who matched the Benders' description. The women were beaten, interrogated, nearly lynched, but they weren't the Benders. This bloodlust for vengeance only fueled the hysteria. The reality was chilling. The Benders could have been anywhere. They could have split up, hiding under false names, starting new lives. Kate, with her beauty and charm, could easily vanish into another town, another role. Perhaps she was already ensnaring new victims, while the prairie burned with the search for her. The failure to capture them gnawed at Kansans. How could a family so infamous, so notorious, simply disappear without a trace? The prairie seemed to swallow them whole, but the townspeople vowed one thing: the Benders would never be forgotten. And if they were ever found, there would be no mercy. The bloody Benders were no longer just a Kansas story. By the summer of 1873, their crimes had captured the imagination of the entire nation. Every newspaper from New York to San Francisco ran sensational headlines: the Kansas fiends, murderers on the prairie, and the House of Blood. For a young America still forging its identity, the Benders became a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in its wilderness. The story had everything that captivated the public: a mysterious family, an inn that doubled as a slaughterhouse, a beautiful daughter who lured men to their deaths, and an escape that left them free to kill again. Readers couldn't get enough. Travelers became more cautious. Stagecoach drivers warned passengers about inns and homesteads along the trail. Families grew suspicious of strangers, even of their neighbors. The Benders' crimes stained not just Kansas, but the very idea of westward expansion. If civilization meant inns like the Benders, perhaps the wilderness itself was safer. And yet, the fascination wasn't just fear. It was morbid curiosity. People flocked to the abandoned Bender cabin. Some chipped away pieces of the cellar walls as souvenirs. Others dipped cloths into the bloodstains, carrying them home like grisly relics. The orchard where bodies were unearthed became a macabre tourist attraction. Meanwhile, sightings of the Benders poured in from across the country. A woman resembling Kate was reported in Texas, working as a fortune teller. A man matching John Ginder's description was spotted in Colorado, panning for gold. Some swore Elvira had been lynched in Missouri. Others believed John Sinister was hiding in the woods of Arkansas. But no capture was ever confirmed. The legend grew darker with each retelling. Some claimed the Benders were never a family at all, but a band of outlaws pretending to be kin. Others whispered they were practicing witchcraft, that Kate's seances were not just a trick but a channeling of something evil. To many, they weren't just killers. They were demons who had walked among men. Through it all, the most haunting truth remained: they got away with it. The cellar was silent. The orchard was still. The inn was torn apart by scavengers. But somewhere out there, the Benders lived on, their hands still stained with the blood of travelers who trusted them. And as long as they were free, America itself felt haunted. As the years dragged on, the frustration of never capturing the Benders grew unbearable. Kansas was no longer just hunting murderers, it was hunting ghosts. Yet every few months, a new rumor surfaced, reigniting hope and hysteria. In 1873, a group of vigilantes claimed they had cornered the elder Benders in Missouri. The story went that the mob dragged John Sinister and Elvira out of hiding, beat them mercilessly, and hanged them from a tree. but when questioned, no bodies were ever produced. Some insisted the mob cremated them on the spot, fearing the law would take the killers into custody instead of delivering frontier justice. Others scoffed, calling it a tall tale born out of bloodlust. Then came another account. Kate and John Ginger had been arrested in Texas, accused of poisoning a man during one of Kate's supposed seances. The newspapers lit up, headlines declaring the Kansas fiends at last caught. But after a few weeks, the truth surfaced. The accused pair were imposters, a traveling brother and sister who bore only a passing resemblance. Released, they vanished into obscurity, but not before giving the public another taste of disappointment. Every few years, another capture was announced, another trial claimed to be the end of the Benders. Some communities even paraded suspects before angry crowds, hoping to appease their fury. Yet none were ever definitively proven to be the real family. The Benders had become shapeshifters in the public's imagination, their faces blurred into every stranger on the road, every suspicious drifter who wandered into town. These false captures weren't harmless. Innocent people suffered. Travelers were beaten, jailed, or even killed because someone whispered they looked like a Bender. Fear turned ordinary men into executioners. The line between justice and vengeance disappeared in the Kansas dust. Still, the question remained, were the Benders truly gone? Or were they still alive, quietly watching the hysteria they had unleashed? For some, the silence was proof they had been killed by vigilantes. For others, the silence was proof they had escaped, clever enough to start new lives, smart enough never to be caught. The Benders' true fate became less important than the story itself. The myth had grown larger than the people, and with every passing year, the truth slipped further away. Among all the Benders, none fascinated the public more than Kate. She wasn't just another murderer, she was a siren, a dark temptress who smiled sweetly at her victims before leading them to slaughter. Her seances, her strange sermons about free love, her unblinking stare, these details made her unforgettable. It was said Kate could convince a man of anything. She could make a farmer believe in ghosts, a traveler trust her with his money, a stranger follow her into the dark. She wielded beauty like a weapon, and for many, she became the very face of evil. Rumors of Kate's survival spread like wildfire. Some claimed she had fled south to Mexico, where she continued her trade as a psychic. Others swore she resurfaced in New Orleans, luring wealthy men into doomed affairs. One particularly chilling story suggested she married a wealthy banker in the East, blending seamlessly into society, her bloody past hidden behind fine dresses and pearls. Whether true or not, these tales turned Kate into a legend. She wasn't just a killer. She was a phantom who haunted America's imagination. Men whispered about her in saloons. Women warned each other of her charm. Parents told stories of Kate Bender to frighten their children into obedience. In a way, Kate had achieved exactly what she wanted: immortality. Not through seances, not through spiritual energy, but through fear. The truth, however, remained out of reach. No one could prove where she went or if she even survived after 1873. Perhaps she died penniless and forgotten, buried under another name. Or perhaps she lived well into old age, watching the world remember her as a monster while she sipped tea in a quiet parlor. That uncertainty was more terrifying than the murders themselves, because if Kate was still out there, she could be anyone. Long after the Benders vanished, their lonely cabin remained, a grim monument on the Kansas prairie. Farmers who passed by swore the place felt cursed. Even after the authorities had stripped the boards and dismantled the murder barn, the earth itself seemed tainted. The ground where the cellar had been dug was black and hollow, refusing to grow crops. Travelers who camped nearby reported nightmares so vivid they woke screaming. Horses balked when led too close, their eyes rolling in terror. Locals whispered that the screams of victims still echoed in the night, carried on the wind. Curiosity seekers arrived in droves. Some came to marvel at the horror, others to test their courage. Men would dare one another to spend the night inside the ruins, swearing they heard muffled sobs, phantom footsteps, and the sickening thud of a mallet on bone. Women fainted at the sight of the cellar hole, imagining themselves strapped into the blood-soaked chair. Souvenir hunters stripped what little remained of the house, a section of floorboard splattered with dried blood, a rusted nail believed to have been part of the trapdoor, shards of glass from the poisoned whiskey bottles Elvira served. These relics were carried across the country, displayed in curiosity shops, and whispered about in saloons. Soon, the Bender cabin became less a place and more a legend. Children dared each other to walk its grounds at night, whispering that Kate's spirit lingered, searching for her next victim. Pastors warned their congregations that the soil was cursed by God himself, a scar left as punishment for unchecked sin. Some said the Benders' victims haunted the site, trapped until justice was done. Others swore it was the Benders who haunted it, laughing in the dark, mocking the men who had failed to catch them. As the decades passed, the cabin crumbled into nothing, its pieces scattered by scavengers and time. But the legend only grew stronger. Every mound of dirt, every gnarled tree that sprouted there was said to hold a secret. It was no longer just a place of death. It was a symbol, proof that evil could thrive in the most ordinary of places. The Kansas prairie had many ghosts, but none as enduring as the Benders. And though their house was gone, their shadow remained, stretching across generations. By the late 19th century, the story of the Bloody Benders had traveled far beyond Kansas. Newspapers republished the tale whenever there was a slow news week, embellishing the details, twisting the facts. Some writers claimed the family had killed dozens more than the bodies found. Up to 50, some even said 100. The truth didn't matter anymore. The Benders had become American folklore. They were mentioned alongside tales of haunted houses, outlaw legends, and frontier justice. The line between fact and fiction blurred until no one could separate history from ghost story. In saloons from Dodge City to San Francisco, cowboys would recount the murders in chilling detail, adding their own flourishes. One might say the trapdoor was stained black with blood. Another swore Kate had carved symbols into her victims before killing them. The tales grew darker with every retelling, each version more terrifying than the last. Children grew up hearing the name Bloody Benders, the same way they heard about witches or bogeymen. Parents used the story to keep them close at night. Don't wander too far, or Kate Bender will get you. But not all retellings were meant to frighten. Some frontier writers used the Benders as morality plays, cautionary tales about greed, lust, and deception. Others painted the vigilantes who hunted them as heroes, even though no proof ever confirmed their success. Meanwhile, the mystery deepened. Every decade brought new sightings. A woman in Montana accused of poisoning her husband. A man in Texas hanged for robbery who bore a striking resemblance to John Ginger. Each time, newspapers dredged up the story again, asking the same chilling question: had the Benders really escaped? Even into the 20th century, the Benders refused to vanish. Historians wrote books, folklorists kept the tale alive, and the name, Bloody Benders, was whispered in horror long after most frontier killers had been forgotten. Why? Because the Benders were different. They weren't outlaws robbing trains. They weren't bandits gunning down sheriffs. They were something far darker, a family, ordinary people who looked like any other settlers. Yet inside their home was a slaughterhouse. That was what terrified people most. Evil wasn't lurking in the shadows. It was sitting across the table, smiling, pouring you a drink. And maybe that evil never left. After the discovery of the Benders' crimes, something intangible settled over Kansas, an unease that lingered for generations. The prairie, once seen as endless and full of promise, now felt dangerous, shadowed by the possibility of hidden horrors. Neighbors began to look at one another differently. Who could you trust when the Benders had seemed so ordinary? A smile across a fence post, once a symbol of community, now carried suspicion. The idea that killers could disguise themselves as good settlers had shattered the sense of safety on the frontier. For years afterward, travelers passing through Kansas recalled the murders with a shudder. Stagecoach drivers warned their passengers never to stay at remote inns. Farmers avoided strangers, no longer offering the warm hospitality that had once been a hallmark of the frontier. Families barred their doors at night, fearing not just outlaws, but the people who claimed to be their neighbors. The murders also left a deep psychological scar on those who had witnessed the aftermath. The searchers who unearthed the bodies carried the stench of death in their memories for life. Some swore they could never eat stew again, as the bubbling meat reminded them of what had rotted beneath the ground. Others admitted to nightmares in which Kate's eyes glowed from the darkness, promising vengeance. The fear spread beyond Kansas. Newspapers from New York to San Francisco reported on the killings, and readers across the country felt a chill. It was no longer possible to view the prairie as untouched wilderness waiting to be tamed. It was now a place where savagery could hide behind a painted smile, where evil could grow in plain sight. The legend of the Bloody Benders transformed into a warning: trust no one. As the story spread, it chipped away at the romantic image of the American frontier. Instead of brave pioneers building homes of hope, people began to imagine hidden killers, sharpening knives behind every door. The Benders had killed more than travelers. They had murdered the illusion of safety. By the early 20th century, the story of the Benders had outgrown its Kansas roots. They were no longer just a murderous family. They had become icons of American folklore. Their crimes echoed in dime novels, pulp magazines, and even early horror films that borrowed their themes of hidden traps and cursed families. Historians debated the facts, but storytellers shaped the myth. The Benders became a canvas for America's darkest fears. Was it about greed? About the fragility of trust? About the thin line between civilization and savagery? Each retelling emphasized a different theme, ensuring the legend never grew stale. In some versions, Kate was painted as a seductress, an evil siren luring men to their doom. In others, she was a witch, her seances and spiritualism proof of her pact with the devil. John Ginger became the simpleton manipulated by his parents, or sometimes the gleeful butcher swinging the mallet. Elvira, the silent matriarch, was portrayed as the mastermind, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Johnster, the brooding patriarch, remained the image of brute force. Even artists found inspiration in the tale. Painters depicted the cabin's trapdoor glowing red, as if hell itself waited beneath. Writers compared the Benders to the Bluebeard legend of Europe, or to the cannibals of folklore. Some even suggested, though without evidence, that the family had practiced ritualistic killings, turning their home into a temple of blood. The Benders seeped into the collective unconscious. Their name became shorthand for betrayal, for hidden evil. To say someone was like the Benders was to accuse them of smiling in your face while sharpening a knife behind your back. And yet, the fascination endured not just because of their crimes, but because they escaped. America has always loved an unsolved mystery, and the Benders gave the nation one of its greatest. They were both real and mythic, both historical killers and ghostly figures that refused to be captured. Even today, the Benders appear in podcasts, documentaries, novels, and films. Their story refuses to die, because at its core, it's not just about murder. It's about the darkest truth of human nature, that evil can sit across the table, pour you a drink, and smile. The cabin of the bloody Benders no longer stands. By the time searchers had finished digging the bodies from the orchard, neighbors had torn the house apart. Some took pieces of wood as grim souvenirs, while others swore they wanted to destroy the place so evil could not linger within its walls. The land was eventually swallowed by the prairie, reclaimed by grass and silence. But silence does not mean peace. Locals whispered that the ground where the cabin once stood was cursed. Horses would refuse to plow near the orchard, shying away as if they sensed the blood beneath the soil. Travelers reported strange sounds in the night, the creak of a trapdoor, the muffled cries of men long dead, the echo of Kate's laughter carried on the wind. For years, no one wanted to live near the property. Farmers who tried claimed their livestock grew sick, their children fell into fevers, and shadows moved across their walls even when no one stood there. One family abandoned their house overnight, leaving food half-eaten on the table, after their son woke screaming that a woman in white had tried to pull him into the floorboards. Whether these stories were superstition or truth, they spread quickly, adding another layer of terror to the Benders' legend. The prairie itself seemed to carry their memory, as though the earth had absorbed their crimes and refused to let go. Ghost hunters today still claim the site is haunted. Some say you can hear the mallet's fatal crack if you stand there at midnight. Others claim to have seen glowing red eyes in the orchard, staring from the dark. Skeptics dismiss these tales, but for those who believe, the spirits of the murdered still cry out for justice, while the Benders themselves linger, watching, waiting. The bloody Benders may have vanished from human justice, but the prairie never forgot. The tale of the bloody Benders ends without a neat conclusion. Their names were never struck from wanted lists, their bodies never displayed in town squares. They vanished, absorbed into the endless wilderness, becoming as much myth as flesh. Yet in many ways, their escape is what made their story immortal. Had they been caught and hanged, they might have been remembered as just another frontier crime. But their disappearance left behind a wound, a mystery that still festers in American folklore. The Benders represent the shadow side of the frontier dream. For every story of hardworking pioneers carving homes from the wilderness, there is this nightmare, a family carving lives from the bodies of their victims. They are the reminder that progress and savagery often walk hand in hand. Today, their story is retold not just as history, but as warning. podcasters, documentary filmmakers, and authors return to it again and again because it speaks to a fear that never leaves us, the fear of trusting the wrong person. We imagine ourselves sitting at that Bender dinner table, smiling politely as Kate pours our tea, never suspecting that beneath our feet yawns a trapdoor into hell. And perhaps that is the true horror. Not that the Benders killed, but that they looked so ordinary while doing it. They remind us that evil does not always appear monstrous. Sometimes it wears an apron, serves you stew, and asks about your travels. So when you next hear a story of kindness on the road, or when a stranger offers you hospitality with a smile too wide, remember the Benders. Remember the prairie cabin, the orchard of graves, and the trapdoor that opened straight into death. Because the Benders were not caught, and though the prairie has long buried their footprints, their legend lives on, whispering through time, warning us that some doors once opened can never be shut again.